Very good morning, students, and once again, welcome to the digital classroom of Science and Technology Part 2. Dear students, we had started with the second part of life processes in living organisms. This is the third lesson, and the lesson is quite lengthy. We had almost finished half of the lesson, and today we are going to continue with the remaining part of the lesson. So let's start with the lesson of the flower. A flower can be divided into two parts. First one is essential whorls and the second one is accessory whorls. Essential whorls are also called as reproductive male and female part of the flower, that is androecium and gynoecium. And accessory whorls are calyx and corolla. So first we will start with the outermost whorl, that is calyx. Calyx is the outermost whorl of the flower. It is green in color. A single unit of calyx is called as sepal, and as it is green in color, it protects the flower in the bud condition as well as helps in the photosynthesis. Second one is corolla, which is very colorful, which is very bright, and it is very important in the process of pollination because being colorful, it attracts the insects, and we had studied that insects, they play a very important role in the process of pollination. So corolla is the colorful part, the second inner whorl, and a single unit of corolla is called as petals. So these two are the accessory whorls. Then let's go to the essential whorls, which are androecium and gynoecium. Androecium is the male reproductive part of the flower. A single unit of androecium is called as stamen, and gynoecium is the female reproductive part of the flower, and a single unit of gynoecium is called as carpel or pistil. So these are the different parts of the flower. Now let's study in detail about androecium and gynoecium. First we will start with the androecium, that is the male reproductive part of the flower. Single unit is called as stamen, and this stamen is made up of two parts. The uppermost, you can see the lobe-like structure, it is called as anther, and it is made up of two parts which are called as anther lobes. Now inside these anther lobes there are pollen sacs present, and in these pollen sacs the pollen grains are found which contain the male gamete. And below the anther, with the help of the filament, this stamen is attached to the base of the flower. So the stalk-like structure which attaches the anther to the base of the flower is called as the filament. So filament and anther are the two parts of the stamen or the androecium. Next is the female reproductive part or a single unit of gynoecium. Female reproductive part is gynoecium, and a single unit of gynoecium is called as carpel. As you can see in the picture, that the uppermost part is called as the stigma. The middle tubular structure is called as the style, and the lowest basal swollen part is called as the ovary, and inside the ovary the ovules are present. Now these ovules differ from flower to flower, and inside the ovule the female gamete is present. Like male gamete, I told you it is in the pollen grain, and female gamete is inside the ovule. So the uppermost part of the carpel, that is stigma, it is having a notch-like structure so that the pollen grains, when they fall on the stigma, they adhere to the stigma and it secretes a sticky substance also, because of which the pollen grains are not flown away by the wind currents. Then style is the tubular structure which joins the stigma and the ovary, and through this style the pollen tube enters inside the ovary. Okay, so the structure of stamen, that is male reproductive part, and structure of carpel, that is female reproductive part. Double fertilization in angiosperms. If you remember, angiosperms are the flowering plants where the seeds are present inside, they are not naked, whereas in gymnosperms the seeds are naked, they are not covered. So here we are going to study about the double fertilization in angiosperms. Now why it is called as double fertilization? Because here twice the fertilization takes place, and now we are going to study how this double fertilization takes place. Now the very first picture is the structure of the pistil or the carpel. As I said, the uppermost part is stigma, second tubular structure is style, and the basal swollen part is called as the ovary, and inside the ovary the ovules are present. Now you can see pollen grain on the stigma. So before the fertilization the pollination takes place. It can be self-pollination, it can be cross-pollination. I hope you remember self-pollination means, yes, when the pollen grains of the same flower are transferred to the same flower's stigma. Whereas cross-pollination means when the pollen grains from one flower are transferred to the stigma of another flower on the same plant or on another plant. Okay, so pollination gets over and the pollen grains are deposited on the stigma of the pistil. Now this pollen grain, it starts germinating. It has two outer coverings. The outer covering bursts because of certain chemical substances which are secreted by the stigma, and the outer covering ruptures and the inner covering comes out in the form of a tube which is called as pollen tube. Here you can see this is a tube-like structure. This is called as pollen tube. And from the pollen grain, two male gametes are released in the pollen tube. Now this pollen tube enters inside the ovary in the ovule, right? Now when we will study the structure of this ovule, the internal structure of ovule is called as embryo sac, right? As you can see in the third one, it has reached, the pollen tube has reached inside the ovule. Then the fourth picture, here it is the structure of the embryo sac. Now here in the embryo sac, you can see the upper one, 3 cells. In the middle it is egg cell, okay, and the 2 side cells are called as the synergids. This is the pollen tube which enters inside the embryo sac. And at the basal part you can see the antipodals. These are the 3 cells, and in the center you can see 2 polar nuclei. Okay, now this actually is a quite a long and a complicated process which you will study when you will go to your higher classes, and if you take science, how these synergids and antipodals, they help in the release of the polar nuclei and formation of the zygote as well as the endosperm. Okay, so these are the 8 cells present inside the embryo sac. The central one is the egg cell or the ovum or the female gamete. On the sides of the egg cell there are 2 synergids, and in the center there are 2 polar nuclei which are the female nuclei, and there are 3 antipodals at the other end of the embryo sac. So in the next slide, I will show you embryo sac. See, it's very clear here. On the top you can see 3 cells, at the bottom you can see 3 cells, and in the center you can see 2 cells. So in total, inside the embryo sac, 8 cells are formed, and in the center the egg cell is there, and it has 2 bodyguards which are called as synergids. At the base there are 3 cells which are called as antipodals, and in the center there are 2 cells which contain the polar nuclei. Okay. Then here it comes the double fertilization. Why it is called as double fertilization? Because in flower the fertilization takes place twice. First fertilization, it is the fusion of male gamete with the egg cell. In the previous picture you had seen that 2 polar nuclei from the pollen grain enters into the pollen tube, and then they reach inside the embryo sac. So one male gamete, it unites with the egg cell. Now male gamete and egg cell, they both are haploid because they are formed by the process of the meiosis, where the number of chromosomes becomes half. So these both are male gamete and egg cell, they both are haploid. They unite, fertilization takes place, and they form a diploid zygote. Now one more male gamete is remaining, right? Now the second male gamete, it unites with these 2 polar nuclei. These 2 polar nuclei unite with the male gamete, and they form a triploid endosperm. Now why I said triploid? Yes, just think. Now in the first one I said diploid because male is haploid and female is haploid. So when they combine, when they fuse, they form a diploid zygote. Whereas here one male gamete is there and 2 polar nuclei are there. These 2 are also haploid. So 2 haploid and 1 haploid male gamete. So when these 3 will fuse together, they form triploid endosperm, right? And this endosperm plays a very important role in the growth of the plant, that in the growth of the seed. Now this endosperm, it provides the nutrition to the embryo which is formed inside the ovule. This is called as double fertilization. I hope you have understood. First, one male gamete, it unites with the egg cell and it forms the zygote, and then the second male gamete, it unites with the polar nuclei, and the endosperm, which is triploid in number, it is formed, and thus it is called as double fertilization in angiosperms. This is the sexual reproduction in the plants. Now students, here we finish with the sexual reproduction of flowers. Next topic will be sexual reproduction in human being, that I am going to start in the new period, so that we can take human male reproductive system and female reproductive system together. Now the previous lesson I had taught you by the e-learning content which is there in our school, and when I had given you the explanation, with the explanation I had explained you the questions which are given in between the lessons, like can you recall, do you remember, can you tell, let's think, right? So we had discussed while the lesson explanation was going on, but here I had explained this lesson to you in the slideshow lecture. So here we had not discussed those questions which are there in between the lessons. So we will discuss those questions now, because these questions, as I told, that they are also equally important and they can be asked, they are asked rather, in the school exam as well as in the board exam, right? So shall we start on page number 22 where the lesson starts. In the beginning it is given, can you recall? Now the very first question is, which are the important life processes in living organisms? And I am 100% sure that each and every one of you can give this answer. Yes, there are so many life processes which take place inside the body, like respiration, circulation, nutrition, excretion, right? Response through nervous system. So all these are the different life processes which take place in the living organisms. Second one is, which life processes are essential for production of energy required for body. Now you know that we need energy, and we had studied that energy is produced in the form of ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate. And where it is produced? Which process? It is the cellular respiration, or where the oxidation of food takes place, right? So first one is respiration, rather cellular respiration or oxidation of the food, and then this oxygen, this energy is supplied to the different cells, that is through the circulatory system. Okay, so respiration, circulation, and the very first one, from where we are getting the raw material for the oxidation of food, for the cellular respiration, that is nothing but the food. So that is the nutrition. So it is nutrition, respiration and circulation. These are the three life processes which are essential for production of energy required for body. Third one is, which are main types of cell division? What are the differences? Now this both we had studied in detail, right? There are two types of cell division, mitosis and meiosis. And I hope you should remember that mitosis, it takes place in the somatic cells, and meiosis takes place in the germinal cells because they produce the gametes. Second point is, in mitosis the number of chromosomes remains the same, right? Whereas in meiosis the number of chromosomes becomes half. How they become half? Because meiosis is divided into two, meiotic first and meiotic second. Meiotic first, where the number of chromosomes becomes half, right? And meiotic two, right? It is nothing but similar as that of mitosis, where the number of chromosomes remains the same. Fourth one is, what is the role of chromosome in cell division? Now chromosomes, what do they have? They have the DNA, that is deoxyribose nucleic acid, and it is very important in cell division because it carries the hereditary characters from one generation to another by the process of cell division. Okay. Next is on page number same, just below the first one. The second one, what do you mean by maintenance of species? Okay. First question. Now, what is maintenance of species? Maintenance of species means the existence of species on the earth. How is it possible, right? It is possible due to one of the very important life process that is called as reproduction. Okay. In reproduction, the new individuals of its own kind are produced, and because of reproduction, the survival of these species takes place in the universe. Second question is, whether the new organism is genetically exactly similar to earlier one that has produced it. Now, we had studied two types. First one is mitosis and the second one is meiosis, right? Now, when the new organism is produced, the main cell, it divides into two and it takes place by meiosis. And in meiosis, if you remember, there is a term called as crossing over of homologous chromosomes, right? A pair of homologous chromosomes, they come together and they exchange a part of the chromosome with each other, okay? And this process is called as crossing over, and thus the reason is that the new organism is not genetically exactly similar to the earlier one. This happens in sexual reproduction, right? Because two parents are there, crossing over takes place. But in asexual reproduction, the crossing over does not take place. So in that, the young one or the new offspring is exactly genetically similar to the earlier one, okay? It is only because of the crossing over process which takes place in the meiosis, meiotic one, that the characters are not exactly similar like the parent. Third one, who determines whether the two organisms of a species will be exactly similar or not? Now, this depends upon the type of reproduction, whether it is sexual reproduction or it is asexual reproduction. Because in sexual reproduction, again, the two organisms are there, crossing over takes place, so the new offspring is not exactly similar to the parent, whereas in asexual reproduction, only one parent is there and thus the offspring is exactly similar to the parent. Fourth one is, what is the relationship between the cell division and formation of new organism of same species by earlier existing organism? Now, in the process of reproduction, the division of chromosomes takes place, right? Now, due to the cell division, the gametes are formed, right? And when these gametes, these haploid gametes, they fuse together during fertilization, again the new diploid zygote is formed, right? Now, in sexual reproduction, the process takes place due to cell division. Whereas in asexual reproduction, there is also cell division and the growth of new organism also occurs due to cell division, okay? So, with this we finish with this 4 questions on page number 22. Now, you can see the picture, okay? A, B, C and D. So, you can see A, B, C and D. Now, in the A, you can see a plant is there and its twig or a branch is shown with the rootlets, right? And this shows that this is a vegetative propagation because the new plant is produced by the stem. Second one, B, you can see the hen is laying the egg, that is the sexual reproduction. In C, yes, it is germination of the seed and the radicle and plumule can be seen. And in the last one, it is the cell division, or you can say it is the binary fission. So, this picture shows the different types of reproduction. The next is use your brain power. Again, it is on the same page, okay? And does the parent cell exist after asexual reproduction? Yes. What happens? Does the parent cell exist after asexual reproduction or fission? No. Because in asexual reproduction or fission, the cell divides into two new daughter cells, right? So the parent cell, it doesn't exist. Okay. So the next is, let's think, and it is given on page number 26 in the first half of the page. The first question is, what would have been happened if the male and female gametes had been diploid? Yes. Now we had studied that in germ cells, the meiosis takes place, because of which the haploid gametes are formed. Now the question is, if these male and female gametes would have been diploid, then what would have happened? Yes, what would have happened? If diploid and diploid male and female gametes fusion takes place, then the zygote will be tetraploid, right? It will be a tetraploid, which is abnormal, right? So the chromosome numbers will not be maintained and it will be an abnormality. That is why the meiosis takes place and the male and female gametes are haploid, and after the fusion they become diploid. Second question is, what would have happened if any of the cells in nature had not been divided by meiosis? Yes. Actually the question is same, but it is just twisted. If meiosis would have not been there, then the gametes would have been diploid, right? Because of meiosis, the number becomes half, it becomes haploid. But if meiosis would have not been there, then only mitosis would have been there, and mitosis, the number of chromosomes remains the same. So again, when these diploid gametes, both the diploid gametes, they would have combined, they would have produced a tetraploid zygote, which again would have been the abnormality, and which would have created abnormality, and the number of chromosomes will not be maintained. Okay. So with this we finish with the sexual reproduction in flower, and we had finished with the double fertilization. Okay. And next period we are going to start a very important topic, that is male reproductive system and female reproductive system. Students, please, whatever questions are being discussed today, try to complete it today itself, so that half of your work is over, and after the completion of the lesson we will discuss the textual question answers, and then you can carry on with the written work. Okay. Thank you. Take care. We'll meet next time.